Good morning, everybody. We're ready to get started with chapter 15. Talking about chapter 14 for just a second, it had a lot to do with the numbers and recognizing what the numbers represented. How the lower numbers meant that somebody had been there for a long time and could probably be helpful, and things that you needed to be careful of. So if the number started with a G, that meant that they were Greek and probably didn't understand German commands very well, which could be a problem if they weren't able to respond quickly enough. So Rivka was giving them some advice of how to survive in the camp. She called them rules. Hannah called it craziness. It's a little bit of both. It's things to be aware of, things to recognize that are really, really important, and things that might keep you alive one more day. So we're going to get started with chapter 15. Again, it's a little bit of a longer chapter. And then later on today, you'll be able to see the video that is explaining how you're going to create your own number. Okay, so chapter 15. In the morning after roll call and breakfast were over, they got their first lesson at the midden. "Commandant," a man called across the wire fence from the men's camp. "Commandant coming!" A woman took up the cry. "He is coming," Rivka said urgently to Hannah and Shifri, who were standing near their cauldrons, where they had been helping dish out the watery soup. "Do what I do." Rivka put her hands up to her mouth as if shouting, but instead made a penetrating, clucking noise by placing her tongue against the roof of her mouth. From all over the camp came the same clicking, as if crazed crickets had invaded the place. The small children, alerted by the sound, came scrambling from everywhere. They raced toward the midden heap behind the barracks. Even the camp guards joined in, alternatingly clucking and laughing, waving the children on toward the garbage pile. The largest children carried the littlest ones in their arms. There were about 30 in all. Hannah watched, amazed at their speed. When they got to the midden, they skinned out of their clothes and dove naked into the dump. Suddenly, Hannah noticed that one of the camp babies was still cradled in a washtub. Without stopping to ask, she grabbed it up and ran with the child into the middle of the midden. Garbage slipped along her bare legs. She waded through a mixture of old rags, used bandages, the emptied out waste of the slop buckets. The midden smell was overwhelming. Though she'd already gotten used to the pervasive camp smell, a cloudy musk that seemed to hang over everything, a mix of sweat and fear and sickness and the ever-present smoke that strained the sky, the smell in the midden was worse. She closed her eyes and lowered herself into the garbage, the baby clutched in her arms. When the all-clear clucking finally came, Hannah emerged from the heap with the baby, who was cooing. She scrubbed them both off with a rag until the child's mother, Lei, came running over. "I will murder that Elihu Krupnik. Where is he? He is supposed to take her in. And look, you left her clothes on. They are filthy." Lei's face was contorted with anger. "No, thanks?" Rivka asked. "Lei, she saved the baby." Lei stared for a moment at Hannah, as if seeing her for the first time. Then, as if making an effort, she smiled. "I will organize some water," she said, leaving the filthy baby in Hannah's filthy arms. "That means thank you," Rivka said. Hannah stared after Lei. "I think," she said slowly, "I think I prefer the water to the thanks." That night she washed out her dress with a cup of water, hanging it like a curtain from her sleeping shelf. Now she understood why the children had all stripped off their clothes, dropping them like bright rags on the sandy ground. She worried that the clothing would be gaudy signals to the commandant, but clearly he already knew, as did the guards, where the children hid. It was all some kind of awful game. But she'd been too scared to stop and too shy to undress out in the open like that. especially while the memory of her naked hours waiting for the shower still brought a blush to her face, especially as the guards, some in their late teens, had all been laughing nearby. As she fell asleep, she was sure the smell of the midden had gotten into her pores, that there was not enough water in the camp, in all of Poland, to wash her clean. The days quickly became routine. Roll call, breakfast, work, lunch, work, supper, work. The meals were all watery potato soup and occasionally bread, hard and crusty. Then they had a precious hour before they were locked in their barracks for the night. The work was the mindless sort. Some of it was meant to keep the camp itself running, cleaning the barracks, the guards' houses, the hospitals, the kitchen, cutting and hauling wood for the stoves, building more barracks, more privies. But most of the workers were used in the sorting sheds, stacking the clothing and suitcases and possessions stolen from the prisoners, dividing them into piles to be sent back to Germany. Still, Hannah was glad of the routine. As long as she knew what to expect, she wasn't frightened. What was more frightening was the unknown, the occasional corpse hanging on the gate without an explanation, the swift kick by the Blokova for no reason. She and Shifri were set to work with Rivka in the kitchen, hauling water in large buckets from the pump, spooning out meager meals, washing the giant cauldrons in which the soup cooked, scrubbing the walls and floors. It was hard work, harder than Hannah could ever remember doing. Her hands and knees held no memory of such work. It was endless and repetitive. But it was not without its rewards. Occasionally they were able to scrape out an extra bit of food for themselves and the little ones while cleaning the pots, burned pieces of potatoes that had stuck to the bottom. Even burned pieces tasted wonderful, better even than beef. She thought she remembered beef. She gave the Blokova a gold ring she organized to get you in here, Leahy explained, wiping her hands on a rag and nodding her head in Rivka's direction. Leahy was the head of the kitchen crew. Her arms were always splotchy and stained. But it was a good job, for she could keep her baby with her. Otherwise, that one. And she spit on the ground to show her disapproval of the three-fingered woman. She would have had you hauling wood with the men. And you would never have lasted, because you are a city girl. It is not in your hands. It is in your hands, not a country girl like Shifri. We outlast you every time. When Hannah tried to thank Rivka, the girl only smiled and shrugged away the thanks. My mother, may she rest in peace, always said, a nemmer is nicht kein Geber. A taker is not a giver, and a giver is not a taker either. Keep your thanks and hand it on. She said it gently, as if embarrassed. Hannah understood her embarrassment and did not mention it again. But she did try to pass it on. She began saving the softer insides of the bread, slipping it to Reuven when she could. Yitzhak's little boy was so thin and sad-looking, still wondering where his sister had gone, that she could not resist him. She even tried giving him her whole bread meal after meal until Godot found out. You cannot help the child by starving yourself, Godot said. Besides, with those big blue eyes, he will have many to help him. And that smile. Hannah bit her lip. Those big blue eyes and the luminous, infrequent smiles reminded her of someone she couldn't name. But you are still a growing girl, Chaya. You must take care of you. She folded Hannah's hands around the bread and pushed her away from Reuven. Go, finish your kitchen duties. I will take Reuven with me. Hannah turned away reluctantly, as if she had somehow failed Rivka. As she did so, she saw that Godot had given the child her own bread, and half her soup besides. It was on the third day in the camp that Commandant Brewer came. again. This time, word was whispered around the camp, for a choosing. His black car drove right up the middle of the camp between the rows of barracks, the flag on the aerial snapping merrily. The driver got out, opened the rear door, and stood at attention. "What is a choosing?" Hannah asked Rivka out of the side of her mouth as they waited beside the cauldrons they were cleaning. She didn't know why, but she could feel sweat running down her dress, even though it was a cool day, as if her body knew something it wasn't telling her mind. There was no movement from the midden pile, where the bright shorts and blouses of the children marked their passage. The commandant strode past without giving the dump a glance. Rivka hissed Hannah quiet and ran a finger across her own throat, the same signal that the peasants had made in the fields when the cattle cars passed them by. Hannah knew that signal. She just didn't know what it meant exactly. She shivered. So that signal like that, like the peasants did when they were coming into the camp, and it kind of meant that, most likely you're going to die. The commandant was a small, handsome man, so clean-shaven his face seemed burnished. His cheekbones had a sharp edge, and there was a cleft in his chin. He stopped for a moment in front of Hannah, Rivka, and Shifri. Hannah felt sweat run down her sides. The commandant smiled, pinched Rivka's cheek, then went on. Behind him was a man with a clipboard and a piece of paper. They walked without stopping again, straight to the far end of the compound. The door banged behind them ominously. Rivka let out a ragged breath and turned to Hannah. "Anyone who cannot get out of bed today will be chosen," she said. Her voice was soft but matter-of-fact. "Chosen for what?" Hannah asked, though she'd already guessed. "Chosen for processing?" "You mean chosen for death," Hannah said. Then suddenly she added, "Hansel, let out your finger that I may see if you are fat or lean." "Do not use that word aloud," Rivka cautioned. "Which word?" asked Hannah. "Finger? Fat? Lean?" Rivka sighed. "Death," she said. "But why?" asked Shifri, her pale face taking color from the question. Why will some be chosen?" "Because they cannot work," said Rivka, "and work." Her voice became very quiet, and for the first time, Hannah heard a bitterness in it, because work mocked Fry. "And because he enjoys it," added Leigh, coming over to see why they were not working. "But do not let them hear you use the word death. Do not let them hear you use the word corpse. Not even if one lies at your feet," Rivka warned. "A person is not killed here, but chosen. They are not cremated in the ovens. They are processed. There are no corpses, only pieces of dreck, only schmates, rags." "But why?" asked Hannah. "Why?" Leigh said. "Because what is recorded cannot be blamed, because that is what they want. So that is how it must be. Quickly, back to work." No sooner had they begun scrubbing again than the door to the hospital opened and Commandant Brewer emerged, still smiling, but broader this time. As he and his aide passed by, Hannah could see the paper on the clipboard was now covered with numbers and names. The Commandant reminded her of someone. A picture, perhaps, a moving picture? She'd seen a smiling face like that somewhere. Dr. Mengele, she said suddenly. The Angel of Auschwitz. As suddenly as she knew it, the reference was gone. "No," Rivka said, puzzled. "His name is Brewer. Why did you say that?" "I told you, she said strange things," Shifri put in. Hannah looked down at her hands. They were trembling. "I don't know why I said it. Am I becoming a muscleman? Am I going mad?" No one answered. Godot had been working in the sorting shed, where mountains of clothes and shoes, Mounds of books and toys and household goods from the suitcases and bags were divided up. It was also the place where men and women could talk together, so there was a quick, quiet trading of information from the women's camp to the men's camp and back again. That night, Godot shared the news with the others of the Zinganji barracks. All the clothes and shoes in good condition go straight to Germany, and we get what is left. But look what I took for you, Chayla. She held up a blue scarf. Organized! You organized it, Tante Godot, Shifri cried out, her hands up with delight. The women all laughed. The first time such a sound had rippled through the barracks since they had arrived. Yes, she organized it. Godot looked up, pursed her lips for a moment, then smiled. All right, I organized it. How did you do it, Godot? Someone called. You can bet she did not ask, came an answer. Godot nodded, stretching the scarf between her hands. Odds McFright, I shall... I don't know how to say that. Hannah translated mentally. If you ask permission, the answer is no. She remembered suddenly another phrase from somewhere else, almost like it. It's easier to ask for forgiveness than permission. She had a brief memory of it printed on something like a shirt. So, said Esther's mother, a self-satisfied look on her face, we may be Zinganji, but we already know how to organize. Esther looked longingly at the blue scarf and hummed quietly to herself. Godot handed the scarf to Hannah. To replace the blue ribbons, she said softly. The blue ribbons? For a moment, Hannah couldn't remember them. And then she did. And because today's your birthday, Godot added. Her birthday, cried Shifri. You did not tell me. Hannah shook her head. My birthday is in the winter, in February. The word sat strangely on her mouth. What nonsense is this? Asked Godot, her hands on her hips. And what kind of word is February? They taught you to count the days by the Christian calendar in Lublin? She turned to look at the women who were circled around them. You think I do not know my own niece's birthday? And that I send a present every year? Of course you know, a gray-haired woman called out. I remember the day she was born, said another. You told me in the synagogue, all happy with the idea. You were only 13, you said, and already an aunt. So, Godot said, turning to face Hannah. Her certainty overrode Hannah's own. Besides, she asked herself, who knew what day it was, what year, in this place? Thank you, Godot, she whispered. It's the best present I've ever had. I think. The only one I remember, anyway. Oh, my dear child, Godot said, pulling her close. Thank God that your father and mother are not alive to see you now. Caught in Godot's embrace, Hannah suddenly remembered the little house in the shtetl and the big embracing arms of Shmuel. What of Shmuel? She said, and Yitzchak, are they... well? Godot sat on a low shelf bed and pulled Hannah down next to her. The circle of women closed in, eager for news. Godot nodded. Now listen, Shmuel is working with a crew that cuts wood, but it's all right. It is what he knows how to do, and he's strong. With him are Yitzchak, the butcher, and Jedediah, and Nathan Borodnik, and their cousin Nemuel. Zadok the cobbler is doing what he has always done, making shoes and belts. They have a cobbler shop here. He is making a fine pair of riding boots for the commandant, size 5. That's a woman's size, Esther's mother said with a laugh. Yes, and they have made up a little rhyme about it. Listen, I'll tell it to you. Brewer wears a lady's shoe. What a cockle-doodle-doo. The women began to giggle. Hannah did not understand the humor. Godot held up her hand and the laughter stopped. And from Vyosk, Naphtali the goldsmith is making rings on order for all of the SS men. He's a very sick man, but they like his work so much they are leaving him alone. And where does he get the gold? Asked a woman in a stained green dress. From the Valises, idiot, someone else answered. From our fingers. Fag said suddenly. The first time she had spoken in days. She held up her hands so that everyone could see that they were bare. From our ears. From our dead, Godot whispered. Hannah wondered whether anyone else heard her. What about the others? Esther's mother asked. I do not remember anything more, Godot said softly. What about the rabbi? Asked a woman with a hair lip. What about Rabbi Borak? Godot did not answer. Fag knelt down in front of her, putting her hands on Godot's skirt. We are sisters, Godot, she said. I am your brother's wife. You must tell me about my father. Godot closed her eyes and pursed her lips. For a long moment she did not speak, but her mouth opened and shut as if there were words trying to come out. At last she said, Chosen, yesterday. Borak, Dayan, Emus. Fag opened her mouth to scream. The woman in the green dress clapped her hand over Fag's mouth, stifling the scream and pulling her onto the sandy floor. 3 other women wrapped their arms around her as well, rocking back and forth with her silent sobs. Chosen, Godot said explosively, her eyes still closed, along with Zadok the tailor, the Bajkin, the butcher from Vyask, and 24 others, and the Rendar. Why? Asked Hannah. The rabbi was in the hospital. His heart was broken. Zadok, too. He had been beaten almost to death. The Bajkin because he chose to go. They say he said, this is not a place for a fool where there are idiots in charge. And the others whose names I do not remember for crimes I do not know. And the Rendar, with all his money, he could not buy his way out? Asked Esther's mother. In this place, he's just a Jew. Like the rest of us, said Godot. Like the least of us. He's a shmate now, said Hannah, remembering Rivka's word. Godot opened her eyes and slapped Hannah's face without warning. That may be camp talk out there, but in here we say the prayer for the dead properly, like good Jews. Godot the bear, someone murmured. Hannah looked up, hand on her smarting cheek. She could not find the speaker, so spoke to them all. Godot is right, she said, her cheek burning. Godot is right. Godot began reciting the Kaddish, rocking back and forth on the sleeping shelf with the sonorous words, and the prayer was like the tolling of a death bell. The rest joined her at once. Hannah found she was saying the words along with them, even though she didn't seem to have any memory of the prayer. Yiskadal v'yiskadash Shemai Rabo. And that's the end of chapter 15. So you can see the death toll is accumulating. We only have a few more chapters. So we're going to kind of learn a little bit more in chapter 16 and kind of add to that count. So we'll read about that one tomorrow. Thank you.